Okay, before we get into any chit chat, I have something serious to address first. Now, you guys know it takes a lot to offend me. Being from Scotland, I'm very thick-skinned. But I must admit, on Instagram last weekend, I certainly reached my threshold, as it was my baby cousin's 21st birthday. I posted a really sweet montage of pictures of us through the years, only to receive a lot of messages. Confused messages of people asking how on earth I'm old enough to have a 21-year-old son. Hey there guys, my name's Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back for another spooky episode of Killer Weekend, where each week we'll discuss a true crime case and you guys can feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments box below. I've got my hair in, it's 100 degrees outside and I'm feeling feisty. If you like all things true crime, supernatural, UFO, conspiracy theory, and all that good stuff in between, then please hit that subscribe button. I'll be here for you each week with our true crime killer weekends, and on and off every couple of Wednesdays with our Weirdo Wednesdays, where we'll discuss something spooky I've heard. I will leave a small disclaimer at the beginning of this episode. It does involve details of violent crime and also a home invasion. If that's a trigger point for you, then please feel free to turn away now. Hiya my wee gremlins, how are you? I'm not gonna lie, I'm not really surviving in this heat. I was at a wedding last week, not that anyone cares or asked, but I was, and I spent quite a lot of time on my fake hair and my makeup and my suit, which made me look like Papa Smurf. After a few hours, started getting a little bit hot under the collar, and by the end of the evening I was sympathising with the witch from The Wizard of Oz. I'm melting! I'm being 100% honest when I say that if I could have gone topless, I would have, but I've got quite big boobs and no one wants to see these puppies out of the cage. But enough about me and my tatas, and let's talk about some true crime. I don't know if any of you other true crime enthusiasts out there will resonate with me on this one, but my friends think I'm a paranoid mess. I'm always lock your doors, check your back seat, make sure you check your new boyfriend's criminal history. But being a female in the 21st century can be a dangerous game. We can do everything right and still the wrong person can intercept. So the next time your mum tells you to call her the minute you're home safe, or your best friend tells you to be careful on that first date, don't roll your eyes, listen to them. Because even though you may think it couldn't possibly happen to you, remember, it has to happen to someone. Tonight, everyone, we will be discussing the baffling murder of Karen Hales, the Intruder. Karen J. Hales was born on the 24th of June 1972 to her mother Geraldine and father Graham. She was raised alongside her two sisters Jackie and Angela in Barham, Ipswich in England. Loved ones would always describe Karen as a bubbly, outgoing young girl who was loved by everyone. And while she was at secondary school, she met another student named Peter Ruffles, and the two quickly started seeing each other. They got pretty serious quite fast, and by the end of 1991, Karen discovered that she was pregnant. And in April of 1992, she gave birth to a little girl named Emily. Not much is actually known publicly about Karen before she became a mother, but that actually seems quite fitting for her, because when she had Emily, it became very clear that this was her destiny to become a mum. Having found her true calling, and despite her young age, Karen was devoted to her daughter, as was her boyfriend Peter. He proposed to his high school sweetheart shortly after, and the two decided they wanted to settle down in their own family home. The start-up home they bought was on Lavenham Road, near to Karen's parents, which suited her well because they had remained extremely close even after she had moved out. Most Sunday afternoons, Peter would drop off his young fiancée at Graham and Geraldine's house so that they could have dinner together and also play with their granddaughter Emily. The last year had been full of promise for the new family, as Karen had even begun planning her dream wedding. Also looking forward to the big day, Peter had been picking up extra shifts as a mechanic at the local bus garage in order to save for the occasion. Karen herself had been working part-time at the local Boots chemist. They led an ordinary life, but it was special to them. But over the weekend of the 20th of November in 1993, their simple life would quickly turn into a real-life horror story. To give you the full details of this case, we need to take it back and start on Saturday the 20th of November, where it all began. It had been oddly cold that autumn, and Ipswich had received over 3 inches of snow overnight. But despite the inconvenience of trying to manoeuvre a pram through that weather, Karen was happy for the change of scenery. With only 1 month till Christmas, the glistening frost just outside her window had the 21-year-old feeling all festive. That evening, fiancé Peter had arranged to go to the pub with his friends. He said it wouldn't be a late one and kissed Emily goodnight as he walked out the door. Karen didn't mind the quiet at all. With Peter now out of the house and Emily fast asleep, she could chillax and watch whatever she wanted on the TV. And I have a few friends, they've got kids and they've never tried crack cocaine, but they say that the feeling would be something like that. But as Karen got cozy on her sofa and settled down for the night, she heard a distinctive rattle coming from the hallway. As she quietly crept closer to investigate, she noticed the handle of the front door pressing down and back up several times. Someone was trying to get inside, and it was too dark for Karen to see out of the small window. She was far too afraid to say anything to the stranger on just the other side of the door, so she hid in her and Peter's bedroom until Peter arrived back home later that night. Karen was pretty shook up by the whole thing, but he calmed her down by reassuring her that it was probably just drunken kids on a Saturday night that had got the wrong house. And like that, the incident was forgotten. The next morning, Karen got up with Emily and made the family breakfast. In the late afternoon, Peter began getting ready for his late night shift at the bus garage. Because of the recent snow, he had offered to drop Karen and his daughter off at his in-laws' house, but she would decline. Because of the drop in temperature, she thought that she should just stay home and do some household chores instead. So at 3:50 p.m, just as it was getting dark outside, Peter headed off to start work at 4 p.m. At 4:15 p.m, Geraldine and Graham entered the bus garage to see Peter. They had been having some car trouble and wanted him to take a look at it for them. Whilst they were there, Geraldine and Graham were informed that their daughter would be staying home that afternoon. So at 4:40 p.m, they decided to stop by her home on Lavenham Road. Initially, when they arrived, they were surprised to see that Karen's front door had been left open. But as they made their way inside, smoke billowed out of the house. Graham, instinctively following the heat, came across a sight that no father should ever have to witness. There on the ground lay 21-year-old Karen Hales, deceased only feet away from her 18-month-old baby girl. She'd sustained multiple stab wounds and her body had been set alight. Luckily, wee Emily was still alive, but had the Haleses arrived just a few minutes later, God knows what would have happened. Graham suddenly swooped up his infant granddaughter and carried her to safety. He would later say that the image of Karen's remains would haunt him forever. But with Geraldine being registered blind, she was fortunate enough to be saved from that same fate. The family really weren't happy with the way the crime scene was handled in the aftermath of the murder. Despite the fact that Graham had put out the flames himself already, firemen went in and trampled through the crime scene, touching things and possibly destroying crucial evidence. From their assessment of the home, investigators came to the conclusion that a few items had been taken from the scene. A floral purse belonging to Karen, which had a small amount of cash in it at the time, and 2 laser knives, which police believed had been used in the attack. There appeared to be no sexual motive to the crime as Karen was fully dressed and there was no signs of sexual assault. Karen's family and friends were devastated, understandably so. They said that she was an amazing mother and a selfless person all round. She was always putting others' wants and needs above her own. She and her mum Geraldine were mum and daughter by blood, but best friends by choice. And with her beautiful features and outgoing personality, it was impossible not to notice Karen. But had she caught the attention of the wrong kind of person? Law enforcement, who were equally stumped by this seemingly senseless murder, asked her friends and family if they could think of any reason why anyone would want to harm Karen or baby Emily. No one could make any sense of it. A loyal partner and loving mother, Karen spent most of her evenings quietly sitting at home. She led a very low-risk lifestyle. She had no secret boyfriend, no enemies to speak of, so maybe her attacker was a wee bit closer to home. In these kinds of cases, many people jump to the first conclusion, that is, it's got to be the boyfriend or the husband. And they're not completely off base with this theory. 61% of female murder victims will be killed by an intimate partner or a former intimate partner. We've recently had the killing of UK mother Caroline Crouch, who, when she met pilot Babis Anagnostopoulos, she thought she'd met the man of her dreams. Once she gives birth to her beautiful baby girl, the family, who are now residing in Athens, are subject to a brutal home invasion, leaving Caroline and the family dog dead. Babis initially claimed that Caroline had been murdered by vicious armed intruders, but that didn't sit quite right, and eventually he was charged with her murder. So, was Peter Ruffles just another Babis Anagnostopoulos? Was he so fed up of family life that he was willing to take the most deadly route out of it? Some aspects of Peter's story did seem a little bit off. We have the break in routine. Remember, most Sundays, Karen would take her daughter to visit her mother and father. But that particular day, she decided that she would prefer to stay home and clean. We also have Peter's statement that someone had tried to break in the night before, something that conveniently Karen had only shared with him. Was this a lie to point investigators in a different direction? There's also been a lot of speculation about Peter's demeanour immediately after the killing. Now, I will say this, I always say on this channel, remember that grief is extremely subjective. So many people deal with that in different ways, and therefore, try not to look too much into that. I mean, you never really tell. Some people cry, some people don't. Look at Chris Watts. He was bubbling like a baby, and we all know that he was still the scum between your toes. When appearing on televised interviews, Peter seemed calm Content even. He had no red eyes, he didn't look tired, and there was no breaks in his voice when speaking about Karen only months after her murder. This was a stark contrast to Karen's parents and her siblings when dealing with the press. However, as suspicious as this may seem, the timeline just didn't add up. Remember, Peter left for work at 3:50 p.m, where he arrived on time at 4 p.m. His in-laws paid him a visit at 4:15 p.m, and then they arrived at the home on Lavenham Road at 4:40 p.m. If he had set the fire before heading to work, the fire would have been raging on for almost an hour before Graham and Geraldine arrived at the house. The fire damage would later suggest that the remains had only been set alight shortly before Karen's parents arrived on the scene. But the improbable time frame wasn't the only reason that Peter was ruled out by police. Many neighbours had seen a suspicious looking male loitering near the home. Two young men who were walking past the entrance to Karen's street that afternoon saw a white male aged between 20 and 25 wearing a dark blue parka with a fur trim hood. It was approximately 4:30 p.m. at this time, and the man was seen hurriedly walking away from the young mother's house. As the two young men approached Karen's home, they said they saw smoke coming out of the front door, but they thought that it was just condensation from the heat inside the house because it was such a cold night that night. The same man in the dark coloured parka with fur trim was also seen by a couple driving on London Road nearby. They said he appeared nervous and was fidgeting heavily before he ran in front of their car, and they narrowly missed hitting him. At around 4:40 p.m, the same time that Karen's parents discovered her remains, a woman was walking her dog in the local Chandry Park, only yards away from Karen's house. She saw the same man acting suspiciously in the shadows. To her, the stranger seemed very on edge as he stared straight at her, and as soon as they made eye contact, he ran in the opposite direction. She also believed that he could have been nursing an injury as he was doubled over as if in pain, clutching his stomach. But was this Karen's killer, and was he known to her or her family? Several clues left behind at the scene would suggest a personal connection between Karen and her murderer. First, we have the cause of death, multiple stab wounds, and no apparent sign of a sexual motive, which lends weight to the theory that this crime was committed in anger and not for sexual gratification. At the beginning of the investigation, there was believed to have been a possible financial motive because of a purse that had been taken from the property, but this would later appear like a red herring as no other items have ever been reported to have been stolen apart from the murder weapons themselves. The killer set fire to Karen's remains in the hopes of destroying any physical evidence. Whoever this was feared that police could connect them to this crime because they had a personal relationship with the victim and they knew that they would be in a select pool of suspects. Another key piece of evidence which would suggest that this crime was emotionally driven was the fact that a small amount of vomit was found near Karen's remains. In 2003, a DNA partial profile was pulled from this, but it was found to be Karen's. This doesn't mean that it was Karen's vomit. This means that Karen's blood could have come into contact with the vomit and therefore it was compromised. Early in the investigation, it was determined that there was no sign of forced entry into the home. Being a mother at home alone with her baby, Karen always made sure to lock the front door, especially if we believe Peter's story about the night before to be true. She would have made sure that that door was locked. There was no footprints outside the home in the snow to suggest that someone had been canvassing the house before finding another access point. Did Karen willingly allow the murderer into her house. Criminal profilers created an outline of Karen's killer in November 1997. It stated, the killer would have probably been known to Karen Hales. He was in his late 20s to mid 30s, who either lived or worked locally and who was of average intelligence. The profile also suggests that he was probably subject to sudden rages when faced with stress or even minor irritations, and who suffered serious mood swings that they might have resulted in problems with colleagues at work. It is also said that her killer might have severe mental health issues. So who is this man? Karen's family can't think of anyone who would want to do this. Maybe it was someone they weren't familiar with, possibly a colleague who she would say hi and bye to. Maybe it was a customer who took Karen's friendly and outgoing nature as an invitation. Despite several emotional public appeals and the arrest of 2 young men who were later released, this case unfortunately remains unsolved. Although a massive long shot, law enforcement wondered if the only witness to this crime could perhaps give them the answers that they needed. 18-month-old Emily Hales. Remember, she lay feet away from her mother during the stabbing and was the sole witness to the killer's human bonfire. Of course, at the time, because of Emily's young age, they were unable to interview her, but as she grew up and slowly learned bits and pieces about that fateful night, they hoped that she could remember anything at all that could help lead them to her mother's murderer. But try as she might, Emily was just too young to recall anything of importance. And still to this day, the image of her mother's attacker is locked away firmly in her mind. A small task force still works tirelessly on Karen's case, and in recent years a £50,000 reward was put up for any information leading to a conviction. It's since been released to the public that a gold bezel Timex quartz watch was found only yards away from Karen's home on Lavenham Road. I know it was a fairly standard watch in the 1980s and the 1990s, but maybe someone who lived locally at the time remembers giving it to someone as a gift. Please take a moment and look at the e-fit again. Does it look familiar? Is he a dead ringer for your uncle who you've not seen in a few years? For the man who works behind the bar at the local pub? Or maybe even your brother? Was there a particular night in 1993 when someone arrived home and was acting out of character? Did you have a loved one who was wearing a dark coloured parka with a fur trimmed hood all autumn long, only for it to suddenly disappear, never to be seen again? This was an extremely violent execution of a young mother. This person would have been covered in her blood and would have probably disposed of their clothing. Did you live in the Ipswich area during the early 90s? If you remember anything, no matter how tiny the detail, it could lead to a break in this 29-year-old cold case. For Karen's loved ones, they have never given up hope that one day her killer will be brought to justice. It's truly been a long and difficult road for them. Geraldine still misses her best friend every single day, and she and her partner Graham had to explain to their infant granddaughter that a monster stole her mummy. But Emily would not remain a toddler forever. She has since become a beautiful and accomplished young woman and even a mother herself to a gorgeous little boy named Tommy. She shares the sweetest messages every year on her mum's birthday, reminiscing on what could have been. Peter Ruffles struggled deeply with the murder of his fiancée, and it took him a long time to get his life back on track, but he eventually remarried years after Karen's death. Karen Hales would have been turning the big 50 this June, and she would have been a proud grandmother to Tommy, a support that undoubtedly Emily could have used within those first few months of motherhood. This was 21-year-old Karen Hales. And she was more than just a dramatic headline. She was a friend, daughter, mother, sister, and lover. Her tombstone hints at the awful manner in which she was snatched from this world in November 1993. But what stands out the most to me is the beautiful poem engraved on it. Sad are the hearts that love you, silent are the tears that fall. Living our lives without you is the hardest part of all. If you know anything that could help in this case at all, please don't hesitate to use the number for Crimestoppers in the description box below. I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up for me. It really helps this wee channel. If you're watching for the first time and the toddler hair clips are not putting you off, then please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. If you'd like to know more about this Scottish wee lass, then please feel free to follow me, not home or to the local shop because it's illegal, on Instagram at Megan True Crime. I have a TikTok page which I barely use at megan.truecrime. And if you're feeling like a 96-year-old woman, we also have Twitter, if anyone uses Twitter, at Megan True Crime. Remember, I love you all so much, so please never forget to lock your doors, don't talk to strangers, and also, if you're on the internet, don't ask a woman who's pushing 30 if she has a 21-year-old son, okay? It's my cousin. See ya! I'm gonna go and have a cold shower, not because, I'm feeling frisky, just because I'm bloody roasting.